Amina stood at the edge of the dark river, the villagers surrounding her, their faces expressionless as the priest raised his hands to the sky, chanting ancient words. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow across the water. Amina's heart hammered in her chest, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had always known this day would come, the day the village would offer her as a sacrifice to the river spirit. But standing here, ready to meet her fate, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her father, once strong and proud, stood at the back with the elders, their eyes fixed on the ground. Amina turned her gaze to the water, its surface swirling unnaturally, as though the river itself was alive, hungry, waiting. The priest's voice echoed in the silence, a final prayer to the river spirit. "You are the chosen one," he intoned. But Amina felt a chill crawl down her spine, a voice in her mind whispering that this was not a blessing. This was a curse. As the chant ended, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. The wind howled, and for a moment, she thought she heard the river laugh. But the villagers only murmured in reverence, unaware of the truth beginning to unfold. As the chant ended, the sky darkened, and the river's surface rippled violently. Amina stepped back, her heart racing as she felt the pull of the water beneath her feet. The river's core was no longer gentle, it was demanding, a force of nature too powerful to resist. The priest's hands trembled as he dropped to his knees, chanting faster, almost in a panic. Amina's father, standing at the back, looked away, his face pale, the weight of the decision now fully upon him. The villagers stared, waiting for the moment when Amina would be taken by the river, offering her life in exchange for the promise of harvest and prosperity. But Amina was no longer afraid of the river, she was afraid of what the village had become, what they had turned her into. They had promised her safety, but now, she was nothing more than a pawn in their desperate plea for survival. The water swirled faster, as though it had a mind of its own, and as Amina was pushed forward, her body trembled. She closed her eyes, prepared to fall, but not into the river. Instead, she felt something worse, a sense of betrayal, of abandonment. Was this really her destiny? Suddenly, as Amina stood there, feet inches from the water's edge, something shifted in the air. The wind died down, the chanting ceased, and the river became eerily still. Amina's breath caught in her throat as she looked over her shoulder, seeing her father's face twisted in regret, but it was too late. She could feel the pull of the river, but it wasn't just the water, it was the weight of generations of tradition pressing down on her. The villagers looked at her as though they were expecting something, some sign that the sacrifice would be accepted. But instead, all Amina could hear was the silence. And then, the river spoke, a low, gurgling murmur that only Amina could hear. "You are not the one I seek." Amina's heart raced, her blood turning cold. The water surged, pulling at her ankles, but it wasn't the spirit that called her, it was something darker. As the moonlight vanished behind thick clouds, Amina felt herself drawn deeper into the river's depths. The villagers gasped, realizing too late that something had gone horribly wrong. The sacrifice had failed, and the spirit they had hoped to appease was not what they had believed. The villagers stood frozen, watching Amina as she stumbled backwards, her feet sliding in the soft mud. The priest's chant grew frantic, but the river did not respond. Instead, it became more violent, as though the spirit inside it was angry, disappointed. Amina's father moved forward, his hands shaking as he reached out to her. "Amina, come back," he cried, but it was too late. The water surged again, and Amina found herself pulled further away. She stumbled, her legs giving way as the river's strength overwhelmed her. And then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The water calmed, leaving her standing on the riverbank, gasping for breath. But Amina was no longer herself. She looked around, seeing the villagers watching her, their faces filled with confusion and fear. She had not been taken by the river. She had been rejected, and in that moment, Amina understood the truth: the river didn't want her. It wanted more. It wanted to punish them all. The sacrifice had failed, but something darker had awoken. And now, Amina realized, the village would have to pay the price. The next day, the village was silent. The river, once a source of life, now felt like a distant, angry force. The crops that had once flourished began to wither, the fields turning brown with every passing day. Amina's father had grown quiet, his face drawn with guilt and regret, but there was more, a sense of dread that hung over the village. The elders gathered in secret, discussing what had gone wrong. Amina overheard their whispers, but they didn't speak of the true reason. They blamed the failure on her inability to satisfy the river, on her rejection by the spirit. Amina couldn't understand why the river had turned on them. It was supposed to save them, to give them life, not take it away. Yet, here she was, standing at the heart of the village, knowing that she had failed. But the villagers didn't see it that way. They saw her as the one who had broken their faith, the one who had failed the village and the river. The priests, once her protectors, now whispered about her as a curse. Every step she took, they felt it. Amina was no longer welcome among them. The river, and the gods it protected, had turned their backs on the village, and it was all her fault. Amina left the village, determined to find answers. The elders' words haunted her, but she couldn't bear staying in a place where she was blamed for everything. She wandered into the forest, toward the source of the river, desperate to confront whatever spirit had abandoned them. The forest was thick with trees, the air heavy with the scent of decay. As she walked deeper, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the unnatural silence that surrounded her. She didn't know what she expected to find, perhaps the spirit of the river, or something else that could explain why everything had gone wrong. She was searching for something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos that had begun to unfold. But when she reached the river's source, she found nothing. No spirit, no guidance, only empty water. And then, as if summoned by her desperation, the river whispered again, not to her, but through her. "You will serve the river's true master." Amina's body froze as the voice filled her mind. The river was no longer just a spirit. It was a force of darkness, an ancient power bound to take more than sacrifices. Amina had not failed the village. The river had failed them, and now it was claiming her as its next victim. Amina returned to the village with a heavy heart, her mind clouded by the revelation. She had walked into the forest, seeking answers, but all she found was more mystery. The villagers had begun to notice the strange events that were happening. The once thriving village was now cursed, with crops failing and the river's waters darkening. Amina's father, filled with guilt, sat in his home, knowing that the sacrifice had not gone as planned, and that they would pay a terrible price for it. But the villagers were desperate. They needed to do something. They gathered once more by the river, hoping for the spirit's favor, but instead, it was the darkness that answered. As the priest began the ritual, the waters swirled violently, as if mocking them. The sacrifice had been made. But the cost was greater than they ever imagined. Amina could no longer stand by. The truth of the river had become clear, and she knew she was no longer just a part of the village's fate. The river was its master, and it had claimed them all. In the dead of night, Amina stood at the riverbank once again, her heart heavy with the burden of the village's sins. The river's voice echoed in her mind, urging her to step closer. As she did, the darkness around the water began to shift. The spirit was there, its true form revealed. The price had been paid. The villagers had been sacrificed, not to a river spirit, but to something far darker, something ancient. And as the river's power swept over the village, Amina realized the true cost of their faith. They hadn't appeased the river, they had awakened it. And now it was coming to claim what it was truly owed. The following days were filled with whispers of strange events. The villagers, once hopeful, now lived in fear. Amina's heart sank as she saw the darkness in their eyes, the fear in their footsteps. It wasn't just the failing crops or the sickened cattle, it was the unseen presence that seemed to hang over them like a thick fog. Each morning, Amina would visit the river's edge, drawn by the river's call, but each time, the water seemed more and more alive, its current swirling with a malevolent force. As she stood there one afternoon, the river's voice grew clearer, more distinct. "You will lead them to the end." Amina's breath hitched. The river wasn't just speaking to her, it was speaking for the village, to everyone. It was no longer a spirit. It was a creature, an ancient being that thrived on fear, blood, and sacrifice. Amina turned her back to the river, hearing the words in her mind, but as she did, she realized it wasn't the river that had to be stopped. It was the power it held over the villagers. In that moment, she knew what she must do: stop the sacrifice, stop the cycle of fear. But she was not the hero of this story, and she had no idea what price she would pay for defying the river. Night came quickly in the village, and the moon was hidden behind clouds, casting an ominous shadow over the river. The villagers gathered once more by the water, desperate, believing they still had a chance to appease the spirit. But Amina could see their desperation, the frantic way they clung to hope. She knew they were being played, manipulated by the river. As the priest began his ritual, Amina stepped forward. Her voice was clear and firm as she spoke out: "The river is no longer a spirit we can appease. It is a curse, a force that demands more than what we have left." The villagers gasped, shocked by her defiance, but the priest's eyes hardened. He raised his hand to silence her, but Amina continued: "It was never the river that brought us life, it was our faith. Our belief in the good, the work we did together, the life we shared." But as she spoke, the ground shook beneath them. The river stirred violently, as though to prove her wrong. The air grew heavy, and the river's surface darkened to a deep, murky black. Amina's words were lost in the growing rumble. The river was not just rejecting them. It was angry, and now, it sought vengeance. Amina stood alone on the riverbank as the villagers scattered in fear, their faith shattered. The priest was the first to retreat, his hands raised in the air, murmuring prayers of fear and desperation. But Amina remained, watching the water churn with rising fury. The river's anger was palpable, its waves crashing against the shore with a force that seemed intent on swallowing the land. The villagers had made the mistake of believing the river had been their savior, but it had only used their faith to grow stronger. And now, it wanted to devour them all. As Amina stepped closer to the river's edge, she felt a cold pull deep within her chest. She realized that the river, in its rage, was no longer a mere spirit. It was a manifestation of greed, of the price paid in sacrifices, and it was feeding on the suffering it had caused. Amina closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to break the cycle. But when she opened her eyes, the river was calm, almost too calm. She felt a presence behind her, a familiar force, and as she turned, she saw the figure of her father, standing on the shore, his face filled with grief. Her father's ghost stood before her, his face twisted with sorrow. "Amina," he whispered, his voice like the wind rustling through the trees. "You have tried to stop it, but you cannot undo what has been done. The river takes its price." Amina's heart shattered as she faced her father's spirit. He had been the one who had led her to the river, the one who had believed in the promise of prosperity. But he had been wrong, just like the villagers. The price was never meant to be paid by one person. It was meant to be paid by them all. "You must stop the river, father," Amina pleaded, her voice breaking. But her father's spirit shook his head slowly. "The river is not meant to be stopped, Amina. It must be fed. It must consume. The only way to end this is to break the curse, by offering yourself." Amina stumbled back in shock. The realization hit her like a blow. She had to become the sacrifice, just as her father had. Her family, the village, had been bound to this cursed river for generations. The only way to end it was to feed it her life. But could she truly give herself up to the river, or would the curse consume them all? Amina returned to the village, her mind clouded by the truth of her father's words. The river still raged, its waves crashing violently against the shore. The villagers had gathered again, waiting for her to offer them salvation, but all Amina could see was the looming darkness, the curse that had taken everything from them. She could feel it in the air, a weight that pressed down on her chest. The village had paid too many times, each sacrifice more horrific than the last. But Amina now understood that this wasn't just about appeasing a spirit. It was about ending the cycle. She had to stop the river before it claimed more lives. She stood in front of the villagers, her voice firm and filled with conviction. This ends tonight. The villagers looked at her with confusion and fear, but Amina stepped forward, eyes locked on the water. The river is no longer a spirit, she said, it is a beast, and it has fed on our blood for far too long. But I will make the final sacrifice. I will end this. The villagers tried to stop her, pleading with her to reconsider. Her father's ghost had already warned her that the river would take her life, but it was the only way to break the curse. The river, once a source of life, had become the embodiment of greed and death, and Amina knew it would never stop until it was appeased once and for all. As she walked toward the river's edge, the water swelled, as though eager to claim her. But Amina did not flinch. She was no longer afraid. I give myself to you, she whispered to the river. The water calmed, almost as if recognizing her willingness. Amina stepped into the water, feeling its cold embrace. The river pulled at her, but this time, it did not drag her under. Instead, it released its hold, as though it recognized her as its final offering. The curse was broken. The village, too, was freed. But Amina knew there would be no return from this. She had given her life to stop the cycle, and now, as she sank into the river, she felt the weight of her ancestors' sins lift. When Amina opened her eyes again, she found herself standing on the riverbank, the sky above her clear and bright. The water had returned to its calm, peaceful state. The air felt lighter, as if the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The village stood behind her, their faces filled with awe and disbelief. They had been freed from the curse, but at what cost? Amina turned, seeing her father's spirit standing at the edge of the village. His expression was no longer filled with sorrow, but of peace. He nodded at her, his gaze softening. You have done it, Amina, he said. You have broken the curse. But Amina knew, deep down, that the price would forever be a part of her. The villagers celebrated, but Amina did not feel like celebrating. She had saved them, but she would never see the life they would lead in peace. She had given it all for them. As Amina walked away from the river, she glanced one last time at the village, the place she had once called home. It had been freed, but the journey had come at a cost too great to forget. She would never return. The sacrifice was complete, but Amina's heart was heavy with the weight of everything she had lost. And as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Amina walked into the distance, leaving behind the village, the curse, and everything that had once been hers. The river of souls had taken what it was owed, and in the end, only the land remained, forever changed, forever scarred. Many years later, the village flourished. Crops grew lush, the land returned to life, and the people lived in harmony. Yet, the river's legend was passed down through generations, told as a tale of sacrifice and redemption. But no one ever spoke of Amina, the girl who had broken the cycle and freed them from the curse. Her story was lost to time, her name erased from the village's history. But somewhere deep in the river, in the silence beneath its surface, the spirit of the river washed over them, a reminder of the price that had been paid, the river's true cost, and the legacy of those who gave all to end the curse. After years when the village again felt their crops were failing and a sacrifice was needed again to the river spirit, they gathered around the same cliff, ready to sacrifice another of their daughter to save the land. All of a sudden, the earth trembled beneath them. And a voice spread around, "You've already given me what I needed," the river spirit whispered, and in an instant, the village was swallowed by the earth, leaving no trace behind. The only thing that remained was the echo of her laughter, fading into the wind. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to be a part of our folktale family. Check out other stories on this channel, comment down below and let me know which city or country you are tuning in from. I read everyone. Till then, take care of yourself.